finally buy that high-end cinematic camera, immediately crank every setting in the menu to the absolute maximum, hit record, and your hard drive is completely full. Camera manufacturers constantly push 8K resolution, 120 frames per second, and 12-bit color as the new standard for professional video. But maximizing all those settings doesn't automatically give you cinematic quality. It guarantees crashed editing software and maxed out storage limits. Look at this 3D chart comparing file sizes. A standard 1-minute 1080p video takes up about 250 megabytes. That same minute shot in 4K at 60 frames per second with 10-bit color explodes to over 4 gigabytes. But when you put both files on a standard 6-inch smartphone screen, they look completely identical. You are capturing a file that is 16 times larger, but your audience receives zero benefit. Social platforms aggressively compress the footage anyway, destroying all that extra data you paid so much in storage and processing power to capture. When the uploaded video looks compressed or blocky, creators often blame their camera. They assume their settings just weren't high enough, which leads them to buy even more expensive gear to fix a problem that gear cannot solve. Choosing the wrong settings for a specific project means investing massive amounts of time, money, and hardware into raw data that your end viewer will literally never see. This visualization shows the fundamental equation of digital video. Video data is resolution multiplied by frame rate multiplied by color depth. Increasing any single variable exponentially increases the volume of that data box, putting immediate strain on your SD cards and processing power. Then there is bitrate, the final bottleneck. Bitrate is the data highway that dictates how much of that total data box can actually be transmitted to the internet or read by your editing software at any given second. These 4 variables are interconnected. Because of hardware limits, cranking one setting all the way up often forces you to downgrade another variable entirely, just to keep the camera from overheating or the computer from crashing. Video settings do not exist in a vacuum. A blanket approach of assuming the highest possible number is the best choice is mathematically and practically incorrect. To avoid wasting resources, we absolutely have to break down each specific variable to build the exact export formulas for different types of creators. This comparison matrix breaks down the actual outcomes of different resolutions. Starting with 1080p, or Full HD, we see the baseline for modern video. It requires very manageable file sizes and edits quickly on basic laptops, making it the perfect choice for mobile and social media delivery. The trade-off with 1080p is flexibility and scale. It lacks sharpness when stretched across a 55-inch television, and if you try to zoom in or crop your shot during editing, the image immediately becomes visibly pixelated. Moving to 1440p, or Quad HD, this is the gap resolution. It requires moderate bandwidth and is highly optimized for razor-sharp on-screen text and desktop gaming, though it is rarely supported by traditional broadcast television. 4K, or Ultra HD, offers stunning clarity on large screens. Its biggest practical advantage for creators is the ability to shoot one single wide angle and then crop in during editing to create up to 3 distinct 1080p shots without any loss in visual quality. That flexibility comes with a severe hardware cost. Shooting 1 hour of Ultra HD 4K generates up to 240 gigabytes of data and requires a constant streaming bandwidth of 15 to 25 megabits per second. 4K mandates expensive infrastructure. You will need high-capacity solid-state drives and a computer with at least 32 gigabytes of RAM and a dedicated graphics card just to play the timeline back smoothly. Resolutions like 6K and 8K demand astronomical storage, up to 900 gigabytes per hour. These are highly specialized formats for visual effects and archival masters. Streaming platforms do not practically support 8K delivery. Ultra-high resolutions are deliberate workflow choices that demand serious capital to function. They are not automatic upgrades for everyday content. Frame rate defines the physical feel of motion. 24 frames per second is the global standard for movies. It provides the natural, smooth motion blur that our brains subconsciously associate with high-end storytelling. But if you film fast, jerky camera movements or high-speed sports at 24 frames per second, the footage will look choppy and disconnected because there aren't enough individual images to track the rapid movement. Bumping the camera up to 60 or even 120 frames per second captures buttery smooth motion. This gives you hyper-detailed action shots and allows you to slow the footage down in post-production for high-quality slow motion. The danger comes when you play high frame rates back at real-time speeds. The hyper-smooth motion creates the soap opera effect, making professional actors and high-end sets feel unnervingly artificial and cheap. There is also an invisible data penalty. Shooting in 60 or 120 frames per second requires 2 to 5 times more data throughput than standard 24 frames per second. This sudden spike in data processing often forces consumer cameras to automatically drop their recording resolution to avoid overheating during a shoot. Higher frame rates should be reserved specifically for capturing fast action or planned slow-motion sequences. They should never be left on as your default camera setting. For each pixel in your resolution, the camera stores a number representing a specific color. Standard 8-bit video displays about 16 million colors. Jumping to 10-bit or 12-bit allows the camera's sensor to capture over 1 billion distinct color values. This animated comparison shows the practical difference. The 8-bit sky gradient on the left creates harsh stepped banding lines because it lacks transition colors. The 10-bit gradient on the right is perfectly smooth, giving editors much more data to aggressively color grade the footage. The harsh reality is that the massive processing strain of 10-bit color is largely invisible to the average viewer. Unless your footage contains extremely vibrant highlights, deep shadows, or heavy color manipulation, the audience will not notice the difference. All of these variables are bottlenecked by bitrate. Bitrate defines the data throughput. It dictates how much detail actually survives complex, fast-moving scenes, like mountain biking through a dense forest. High bitrate is a double-edged sword. It prevents that fast-paced forest footage from collapsing into a blocky, pixelated mess, but it rapidly depletes your SD card space. It also creates a delivery bottleneck. If you export a video with a massive bitrate and your viewer's internet bandwidth is lower than that number, the video will sit there infinitely buffering. Capturing billions of colors and utilizing maximum bit rates serves no purpose if the final delivery platform compresses the file down to a fraction of its size, or if the viewer's internet simply cannot play it. Look at this flowchart. To find your optimal export formula, determine your primary delivery platform. Scenario A, the social media creator, uses 1080p, 24 frames per second, and 8-bit color for rapid uploads. Scenario B, the desktop streamer, uses 1440p at 60 frames per second. Here, you sacrifice traditional cinematic motion blur to gain razor-sharp on-screen text and hyper-fluid gameplay that matches the refresh rates of standard desktop monitors. This specific resolution and frame rate combo perfectly bypasses the massive bandwidth bottleneck that makes live streaming in 4K nearly impossible for most residential internet connections. Finally, Scenario C is the prosumer filmmaker shooting client work or YouTube premium content. Your formula is to capture in 4K at 24 frames per second with 10-bit color, and then deliver the final file in either 1080p or 4K, depending on the client. As this scorecard notes, this path absolutely requires high-end editing hardware and massive storage arrays. Workflow success doesn't come from blindly maxing out your camera's spec sheet. It comes from adhering to the exact formula that matches your delivery destination. When you sit down to edit, there is a hard mathematical rule for software setup. Always match your editing timeline's frame rate to your shooting frame rate. If you shoot in 24 frames per second, do not drop that footage onto a 30 or 60 frame per second timeline, or the software will duplicate and blur the overlapping frames. To ensure both quality and efficiency, follow the golden rule of modern video workflow. Capture higher, but deliver lower. Shoot in 4K to give yourself cropping flexibility, but export in 1080p to save time and bandwidth. Before you touch a single camera setting, determine exactly what screen your audience uses to watch your content. Once you know the destination, let the required data math follow naturally from there.